In 2008, Crocs was losing $1 million every single day, and fashion experts were calling them the ugliest shoes ever made today. They sell a pair every 2 seconds, and celebrities fight to collaborate with them. The way they pull this off will absolutely blow your mind. Here's something that makes absolutely no sense. Crocs are objectively ugly. Like, genuinely weird-looking foam clogs with holes in them that look like something a cartoon character would wear. Fashion magazines have literally called them crimes against style. People have created entire websites dedicated to hating them. Time magazine once included them in a list of the 50 worst inventions alongside things like New Coke and subprime mortgages. And yet, Crocs is now worth over $8 billion. They sell over 100 million pairs of shoes every year. Celebrities like Justin Bieber, Post Malone, and Bad Bunny are begging to collaborate with them. High-end fashion designers like Balenciaga are putting Crocs on runways in Paris and Milan. People camp out overnight to buy limited edition Crocs that resell for 10 times their retail price. This makes zero sense until you understand the full story. Because what Crocs did wasn't just survive despite being ugly. They turned being ugly into their biggest advantage. They transformed hate into hype. They made the least fashionable shoe in the world into one of the most desirable items in fashion. They took a product that was dying and turned it into a cultural phenomenon. By the end of this video, you're going to see exactly how a company went from bankruptcy, from being universally mocked, from having a product everyone said they'd never wear, to creating a movement that transcends generations and demographics. And the strategy they used, it's one of the most brilliant marketing transformations you'll ever see. This isn't just about ugly shoes becoming acceptable. This is about understanding culture at its deepest level, embracing your flaws unapologetically, and turning your biggest weakness into your greatest strength. It's about timing, partnerships, and having the courage to be different when everyone's telling you to change. Let's start at the beginning. And the beginning is actually pretty boring and completely accidental. In 2002, 3 guys were sailing in the Caribbean: Scott Siemens, Lyndon Hansen, and George Bodeker. They weren't fashion designers with grand visions. They weren't shoe industry veterans with decades of experience. They were just regular guys on a boat, enjoying some time away from their normal lives. Siemens had brought along these weird foam clogs he'd gotten from a small Canadian company called Foam Creations. The clogs were originally designed as spa shoes, the kind of thing you'd wear at a resort while getting a massage or maybe while puttering around in a garden. Nothing revolutionary, nothing that was supposed to change the footwear industry. But Siemens noticed something during their sailing trip. These foam clogs were incredibly comfortable for being on a boat. They were waterproof, obviously. They didn't slip on wet boat decks because the material had natural grip. They dried quickly. They were lightweight. And most importantly, you could wear them all day without your feet hurting. The 3 guys started talking. Siemens said these clogs would be perfect for boating. Hansen agreed. Bodeker, who had some business experience, thought maybe they could turn this into something, not a fashion empire, not a billion-dollar company, just a small business selling practical shoes to people who spent time on boats. They contacted Foam Creations and licensed the design. Then they made some modifications to improve the functionality. They added the holes on top for better ventilation and water drainage. They adjusted the sizing. They refined the foam material to make it more durable and comfortable. They started a company and named it Crocs, like crocodiles, because the shoes could work on both land and water. The logo was a crocodile. The whole branding was about versatility and function, not fashion. The first Crocs were sold at a boat show in Fort Lauderdale, Florida in 2002. The 3 founders brought to 100 pairs of shoes, not really knowing if anyone would be interested. They set up their booth, put out the shoes, and waited. They sold out in one day, every single pair. People who worked on boats, people who owned boats, people who just like being near water. They all saw these shoes and immediately understood their value, not because the shoes were beautiful or stylish, just because they solved problems that these people had. That first year, 2002, Crocs sold about 76,000 pairs, all through word of mouth and showing up at events where their target customers were. They didn't have a big marketing budget. They didn't have celebrity endorsements. They just had a product that worked really well for specific use cases. The shoes started gaining organic traction in communities where comfort and functionality mattered more than fashion. Nurses discovered them and fell in love instantly. When you're on your feet for 12-hour shifts in a hospital, running from room to room, comfortable shoes aren't a luxury. They're a necessity, and Crocs were more comfortable than any other shoe nurses had tried. Word spread through hospitals. One nurse would wear Crocs, other nurses would ask about them, and soon entire hospital departments were wearing them. The same thing happened in restaurants. Chefs and kitchen workers discovered that Crocs were perfect for hot, slippery kitchen environments. They were slip-resistant. They could be hosed off at the end of a shift, and they kept your feet comfortable even when you were standing over a hot stove for hours. Gardeners loved them because they could get completely covered in mud and dirt, and you could just spray them with a hose and they'd be clean. Parents loved them for their kids because they were indestructible. Kids could wear them to the beach, to the pool, to play outside, and the shoes would last forever. By 2004, Crocs were selling in the millions. The company was growing faster than the founders had ever imagined. This wasn't supposed to be a massive company. It was supposed to be a niche product for boaters. But it had tapped into this huge market of people who just wanted comfortable, practical shoes and didn't care what they looked like. In 2005, just 3 years after selling their first shoes, Crocs went public. The IPO valued the company at over $1 billion. $1 billion for a company selling foam clogs. The founders and early investors became incredibly wealthy almost overnight. The success attracted attention from investors and business people who wanted to push Crocs even bigger, and the company started expanding aggressively. Maybe too aggressively. But here's where things started getting weird and complicated, because Crocs were becoming popular, not just with nurses and restaurant workers, but with regular people who had no practical need for them. Suburban moms started buying them. Kids wanted them in every color. Teenagers were wearing them to school, and they were absolutely everywhere you looked. You couldn't go to a mall without seeing dozens of people wearing Crocs. You couldn't go to a park without kids running around in brightly colored Crocs. They were at beaches, at pools, at grocery stores, at airports. Crocs were having a moment. The company capitalized on this by making Crocs in every color imaginable. Bright pink, neon green, electric blue, sunny yellow, deep purple, orange, red, classic white, black, and dozens of other colors and patterns. Some had patterns printed on them. Some had different textures. Some had fur lining for cold weather. People weren't just buying one pair. They were buying multiple pairs in different colors. Crocs became collectible. Some people had 10 or 15 pairs in their closet. The company was growing so explosively fast they could barely manage it. They were opening new factories around the world to keep up with demand. They were hiring thousands of employees. They were expanding into new countries. They were opening their own retail stores. They were acquiring other shoe companies to expand their product line. Revenue went from $13 million in 2003 to $847 million in 2007. That is a 65 times increase in just 4 years. This kind of hypergrowth seemed like an incredible success story. The American dream realized. But underneath all this growth, serious problems were developing that nobody wanted to acknowledge. First and most critical problem, Crocs were a fad. They were trendy because they were new and different and everyone was talking about them. But fads, by definition, don't last. They burn hot and then they die. And once everyone already owns Crocs, why would they buy more? Unlike regular shoes that wear out and need replacing every year or two, Crocs were made of this incredibly durable foam material. One pair could last for years, maybe even decades, if you took care of them. Second problem, the cultural perception of Crocs was souring rapidly. What started as those interesting, comfortable shoes was shifting to those ugly shoes that people with no sense of style wear. Fashion critics were starting to write hit pieces about Crocs. Style magazines were including them and lists of worst fashion trends, right alongside trucker hats and Ugg boots with mini skirts. Fashion bloggers, who were becoming increasingly influential in the mid-2000s, were brutal. They post photos of people wearing Crocs in public with captions mocking them. They write articles with titles like 10 Reasons Why Crocs Are the Worst Thing to Happen to Fashion, or if you wear Crocs, we can't be friends. People started getting teased at school or work for wearing Crocs. What had been seen as a fun, comfortable shoe was now becoming a symbol of not caring about your appearance. The cultural narrative shifted from practical to gave up on life. Third problem, the company had expanded way too fast and way too aggressively. They'd opened something like 30 factories around the world. They'd acquired multiple other shoe companies, trying to diversify beyond just clogs. They'd opened hundreds of retail stores. They'd hired thousands of people to manage all this expansion. Their operating costs were absolutely massive. They had enormous overhead. And all of this expansion was based on the assumption that Crocs would keep growing forever, that the fad would never end, that demand would stay high indefinitely. This was a dangerous assumption to make about any trendy product, but especially about a product that was becoming culturally uncool. And then 2008 happened, and everything fell apart simultaneously. The global financial crisis hit, banks collapsed, the stock market crashed. People lost their jobs by the millions. The entire economy went into free fall. Consumer spending dried up almost overnight. People stopped buying stuff they didn't absolutely need, and comfortable foam clogs, no matter how practical, definitely fell into the don't need category. When you're worried about losing your house or feeding your family, you're not buying new shoes unless your old ones have completely fallen apart. Crocs sales dropped off a cliff. Demand evaporated. The stock price, which had been over $70 per share at its peak, crashed down to less than $1. Less than $1. The company had lost over 99% of its market value. They had warehouses overflowing with unsold shoes in every color and size. They had factories that they'd built to handle massive demand, now sitting mostly empty. They had retail stores with almost no customers. They had massive debts that they'd taken on to fund their expansion, and no way to pay those debts. The company was hemorrhaging money, not just losing a little bit. They were losing more than $1 million every single day, They were going deeper into debt and closer to complete bankruptcy. Employees were panicking. They could see the writing on the wall. The company was dying, and when it died, they'd all lose their jobs. The mood inside Crocs headquarters was apparently dark and depressing. People who thought they were part of an incredible success story now realized they'd been part of a bubble that had burst. The founder, George Bodeker, resigned as CEO in 2008, whether he was pushed out or left voluntarily. The message was clear. The people who built Crocs during its rise couldn't fix it during its fall. The company brought in a turnaround specialist named John McCarville as the new CEO. McCarville was known for taking struggling companies and either fixing them or managing orderly shutdowns. His job was basically to keep Crocs alive long enough to either save it or sell it for parts. McCarville looked at the situation and realized how bad things really were. The company was burning through cash. They had way too many employees, too many stores, too many factories. The entire business model was built for hyper-growth that wasn't happening anymore. He had to make brutal decisions immediately. Decisions that would hurt a lot of people but were necessary for survival. He closed 75 retail stores, about half of all the stores Crocs owned. He shut down multiple factories around the world. He laid off thousands of employees. About a third of the entire workforce got fired in waves of layoffs that stretched over months. People who'd moved their families to work for Crocs, who'd bought houses based on their Crocs salary, suddenly had nothing. The company that had been worth billions of dollars just a few years earlier was fighting minute by minute just to stay alive. Financial analysts were openly predicting that Crocs would file for bankruptcy within months. Some were even calculating what the company's assets would be worth in liquidation. And making everything worse, the product itself had become a cultural joke, a punchline, a symbol of everything wrong with fad products and tasteless consumers. There was a website called IHateCrocs.com that had millions of visitors. People would submit photos of Crocs they'd seen in public, and other users would comment making fun of them. The site had an entire section dedicated to Crocs crimes against fashion, showing the worst examples of people wearing Crocs inappropriately. Fashion bloggers were writing articles with titles like Crocs, the worst shoe ever made, and Why Crocs Deserve to Die. Late-night TV hosts like David Letterman and Conan O'Brien were making jokes about them in their monologues. Crocs became shorthand for ugly, for tasteless, for having given up on trying. The general consensus in culture was that Crocs were disgusting, that people who wore them had no self-respect, and that the company deserved to go bankrupt for inflicting these monstrosities on the world. It was socially acceptable, even encouraged, to openly mock Crocs and the people who wore them. This presented a massive problem. Even if McCarville could fix the financial issues, even if he could cut costs enough to stop the bleeding, how do you fix a brand that everyone hates? How do you sell a product that's become a cultural joke? Most brands in this situation would try to rebrand completely, change the product, make it look different, distance yourself from the thing everyone hates. But McCarville and his team realized something important that would ultimately save Crocs. Some people still love Crocs, not a lot of people, but some, and these people didn't just like Crocs. They genuinely loved them, not for fashion, not to be ironic. They loved them because the shoes were genuinely comfortable and practical in ways that other shoes weren't. Nurses still wore them for their entire 12-hour shifts and swore they were the only shoes that kept their feet from hurting. Chefs still wore them in hot, slippery kitchens because they were the safest, most comfortable option. Restaurant servers, gardeners, people who worked at theme parks standing all day, they all still bought Crocs regularly. These people didn't care even a little bit that fashion magazines hated Crocs. They weren't wearing them to look good at a party. They were wearing them because they had jobs that were physically demanding, and Crocs made those jobs more bearable. Parents still bought them for their kids because they were indestructible and could survive any abuse kids put them through. You could buy a pair of Crocs for your child, and they'd last until the kid outgrew them, no matter how rough they were on shoes. McCarville realized that Crocs didn't need to be fashionable to survive. They didn't need to chase trends or try to be cool. They needed to focus on the people who actually valued what Crocs fundamentally offered: unmatched comfort and practical functionality. So they cut back on all the wild expansion. They stopped trying to be everything to everyone. They stopped trying to open stores in every mall. They stopped trying to make dozens of different styles. Instead, they focused on their core product, the classic clog, and their core customers. People who needed comfortable, functional footwear for work or specific activities. They also did something really smart that would pay off huge later. They leaned into customization. Through Jibbitz, the holes in the top of Crocs had originally been designed just for ventilation and water drainage. But people, especially kids, had started sticking things in the holes. Little toys, buttons, whatever fit. They were personalizing their Crocs in creative ways. Crocs turned this organic behavior into an actual product line. They created Jibbitz, little plastic charms specifically designed to snap into the holes on Crocs. You could get Jibbitz of cartoon characters, sports team logos, country flags, food items, animals, letters, numbers, basically anything you could think of. Kids absolutely went crazy for these. You could decorate your Crocs to reflect your interests and personality. If you love soccer, you could put soccer ball Jibbitz on your Crocs. If you loved unicorns, you could cover your shoes in unicorn Jibbitz. Your Crocs became unique to you, a form of self-expression. This was brilliant for multiple business reasons. First, It gave people a reason to keep buying Crocs products even if they already had shoes. You could always buy more Jibbitz to change up your look. Second, it transformed Crocs from just footwear into a platform for self-expression and personalization. Third, the profit margins on Jibbitz were incredible. They cost almost nothing to manufacture but sold for $2 to $5 each, and people would buy dozens of them. Fourth, and maybe most importantly, it created an emotional connection between customers and the product. When you spend time decorating your Crocs with Jibbitz that represent things you care about, those shoes become meaningful to you. They're not just generic footwear anymore. They're your Crocs, personalized by you. By 2010, Crocs had stabilized financially. They weren't growing explosively anymore, but they'd stopped the free fall. They cut costs enough that they were profitable again, at least barely. They'd found their niche serving people who valued comfort and function over fashion. But they were still deeply uncool in the broader culture, still mocked regularly, still considered ugly and tasteless. The brand was functional but had zero cultural cachet or desirability beyond their core practical users. The company was alive, but barely. They were surviving, not thriving. They'd avoided bankruptcy, but they hadn't solved the fundamental problem of their reputation, and for several years. That's just where they stayed, stable but stagnant, making enough money to keep going but not growing. And then something completely unexpected happened that would change absolutely everything about Crocs' trajectory. In 2016, a high-fashion designer named Christopher Kane put Crocs on the runway during London Fashion Week. Christopher Kane wasn't some nobody. He was a legitimate, highly respected designer who'd won major awards. His shows were covered by Vogue and other serious fashion publications, and he took Crocs, the ugliest, most mocked shoes in the world, and put them in a serious fashion show. He'd covered them in marble patterns and decorative elements. He paired them with elegant dresses. He had professional models wearing them on the catwalk. This was absolutely insane. Nobody could believe it was happening. Christopher Kane was using Crocs, actual Crocs, as high fashion. The fashion world didn't know what to think. Some critics hated it and thought Kane was trolling or had lost his mind. But others thought it was interesting and provocative. It was unexpected. It challenged assumptions about what could be fashionable. It played with the boundaries between high fashion and low fashion, between taste and kitsch. And this moment opened a door that Crocs hadn't even known existed. It suggested that maybe, just maybe, Crocs could be fashionable. Not in spite of being ugly, but because of being ugly. Around this exact same time, there was a broader cultural shift happening in fashion. The idea of ugly fashion or normcore was becoming trendy among fashion-forward people. The fashion world was embracing things that were traditionally considered unstylish or uncool. Dad, shoes, chunky sneakers that looked outdated and ugly, were suddenly cool. Brands like Fila and Balenciaga were making shoes that looked intentionally ugly, and people were paying hundreds of dollars for them. Fanny packs, which had been considered embarrassing for decades, were coming back. Oversized, ill-fitting clothing was in style. Fashion was moving away from trying to look perfect and polished toward being more ironic, more playful, more willing to embrace things that traditional fashion rules said were wrong. The whole vibe of fashion was changing from look how beautiful and elegant I am to look how confident I am that I can wear whatever I want and make it cool through sheer force of personality. Crocs fit absolutely perfectly into this trend. They were about as uncool and ugly as you could possibly get, which, in this new context, made them interesting, made them subversive, made them, in a weird inverted way, cool. You weren't wearing Crocs because you had to. You were wearing Crocs because you were so confident in your own style that you didn't need traditional fashion validation. You were wearing Crocs as a statement. I don't care what you think is fashionable. I wear what I want. Crocs saw this opportunity and didn't waste a single second. They leaned into fashion collaborations aggressively and strategically. They partnered with streetwear brands like Palace, a London-based skate brand that was hugely influential in street fashion. Palace was known for being cool and exclusive, and their collaboration with Crocs, released in limited quantities, sold out almost immediately. They worked with artists, musicians, and designers to create special edition Crocs. Each collaboration created limited edition versions that were genuinely hard to get. Only a few thousand pairs made, only available at specific stores or online for a brief window. And something absolutely amazing started happening. These limited edition Crocs would sell out in minutes. People would line up outside stores before they open, hoping to get a pair. They'd sit at their computers, refreshing websites over and over, waiting for the shoes to drop so they could buy them before they sold out. And these weren't cheap. Special edition Crocs were selling for $60, $70, $80 or more, way more than regular Crocs. And they'd still sell out instantly. Even crazier, they started reselling on secondary markets for multiples of their retail price, on sites like Stocks and Goat, where people buy and sell limited edition sneakers. Crocs were selling for hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands for the rarest collaborations. Let me say that again because it's almost unbelievable. Crocs, the same shoes that had been worthless and mocked just a few years earlier, were becoming valuable collectibles. People were treating them like limited edition Jordans or Yeezys. The fashion crowd started wearing Crocs, ironically at first. Look how funny it is that I'm wearing these objectively ugly shoes. It was a joke, a statement, a way of being subversive. But then something shifted. The irony faded and they just became part of the fashion landscape. People started wearing Crocs, not as a joke, but because they actually liked them. Fashion influencers on Instagram and emerging platforms like TikTok started posting photos of themselves wearing Crocs, not mocking them, celebrating them, showing creative ways to style them, sharing their gibbets collections. In 2017, Crocs collaborated with Balenciaga, one of the most prestigious luxury fashion houses in the entire world. Balenciaga is the kind of brand that celebrities wear on red carpets, the kind of brand featured in high fashion magazines, the kind of brand that represents the absolute pinnacle of luxury fashion. And Balenciaga made Crocs, platform Crocs covered in Balenciaga branding and design elements. These cost $850, $850 for foam clogs. That's more than most people spend on an entire season's wardrobe. And they sold out completely. People actually paid $850 for designer Crocs. Fashion editors who had spent years writing articles about how terrible Crocs were, who had built parts of their careers on mocking Crocs, were now writing articles about how Crocs were having an unexpected fashion moment. How ugly chic was the defining trend of the late 2010s. How Crocs represented a new confidence and rejection of traditional fashion rules. The cultural narrative around Crocs was changing rapidly. They weren't just ugly shoes anymore. They were bold fashion choices. They were statements about confidence and individuality. They were proof that fashion rules were meant to be broken. But Crocs' real masterstroke came when they started collaborating with celebrities and influencers, who had massive, dedicated fan bases. In 2017, they partnered with Drew Barrymore on a limited edition line. Drew Barrymore was a beloved actress with a wholesome, relatable image. Her involvement gave Crocs mainstream credibility. But the real game changer came in 2018 when they worked with Post Malone. Post Malone, the rapper and singer, was at the peak of his popularity. He had multiple #1 songs. He had millions of devoted fans, mostly young people who were highly engaged with fashion and trends, and Post Malone genuinely loved Crocs. He wore them all the time. It wasn't a fake endorsement for money. He actually thought they were comfortable and cool. Crocs gave Post Malone the opportunity to design his own version. He created Crocs with little devil horns sticking up from the heel. They featured his face and tattoo designs. They came with special gibbets including a martini glass and a yellow smiley face, both symbols associated with Post Malone's music and image. The first Post Malone Crocs dropped online and sold out in 10 minutes. 10 minutes for tens of thousands of pairs of shoes. Completely gone. The Crocs website crashed from too much traffic. People who didn't get a pair were devastated. Post Malone and Crocs did it again, and again, and again. Each collaboration sold out faster than the last. People were camping overnight outside stores. They were using bots to try to buy pairs online. The hype was insane. Post Malone wearing Crocs and designing his own made them cool with his massive fan base. And Post Malone's fans were exactly the demographic that had previously considered Crocs uncool. Young people, 15 to 25 years old, fashion conscious, active on social media. These were people who cared deeply about what was trendy and cool. And suddenly, through Post Malone, Crocs were trendy and cool. Then came Justin Bieber, one of the biggest pop stars on the planet. Bieber started wearing Crocs regularly, not just occasionally. He'd post pictures on Instagram wearing bright yellow Crocs with socks. He'd wear them to events, on errands, everywhere. His 200 million Instagram followers saw this, and many wanted to copy his style. Crocs collaborated with Bieber to create his own line. Again, instant sellouts, multiple releases, each one selling out in minutes. The demand was so overwhelming that Crocs' website would crash every time a new Bieber collaboration dropped. Suddenly, Crocs weren't just for nurses and gardeners anymore. They were for fashion-forward young people who wanted to be part of the trend, who wanted to wear what their favorite celebrities were wearing, who wanted to express their personality through their shoes. The collaborations kept coming, each one more unexpected than the last. They worked with Bad Bunny, the Puerto Rican rapper who became one of the biggest music stars in the entire world. His Crocs featured glow-in-the-dark designs and sold out in 16 minutes. They collaborated with KFC, the fried chicken restaurant. They created Crocs that looked like pieces of fried chicken, complete with printed breading texture. They even included exhibits that smelled like fried chicken. This sounds completely absurd, and it was, but they sold out immediately. The absurdity was part of the appeal. They partnered with literally every major pop culture property. Lightning McQueen from the Cars movies, Toy Story characters, Star Wars, Harry Potter, Marvel superheroes, Disney princesses. If it was popular in culture, Crocs made a collaboration with it. Each collaboration created massive hype. Each sellout created FOMO, fear of missing out. People who never considered buying Crocs in their entire lives suddenly wanted them desperately because they could get them. The artificial scarcity created desire. Crocs had figured out something absolutely brilliant about modern consumer psychology. They weren't selling comfort anymore, at least not primarily. They were selling exclusivity, cultural relevance, and self-expression. They were selling the feeling of being part of something cool and having something rare that other people wanted. The Jibbitz customization system had a massive resurgence. People would spend hours decorating their Crocs with dozens of Jibbitz to create designs that reflected their personality perfectly. Crocs became a canvas for personal style, for showing the world who you were and what you cared about. And the company leaned into social media harder than almost any other traditional footwear brand. They encouraged people to post pictures of their Crocs on Instagram and TikTok using specific hashtags. They worked with influencers of all sizes, from mega celebrities down to micro-influencers, with just a few thousand followers, sending them free Crocs to feature in content on TikTok. Especially, Crocs exploded. Videos about Crocs collectively got billions of views. People would show off their Crocs collections, some people having 20, 30, 50 pairs in different colors and styles. They'd share how they styled Crocs with different outfits, proving you could make them work with anything from sweatpants to dresses. They'd review new collaborations, unbox limited editions, show off their Jibbitz arrangements. Crocs went from being mocked online to being celebrated online. The same internet that had created IHateCrocs.com was now creating fan communities, Discord servers, and Instagram accounts dedicated entirely to collecting, trading, and celebrating Crocs. The pandemic in 2020 accelerated everything even more dramatically. When people were stuck at home during lockdowns, they wanted comfortable clothes and shoes. Formal shoes sat in closets unused. High heels gathered dust. People were living in their most comfortable items, and Crocs were perfect for this moment. But it wasn't just about comfort during the pandemic. People stuck at home and bored started buying things online to cheer themselves up, to give themselves something to look forward to. The bright colors of Crocs, the fun collaborations, the ability to customize them with gibbets. All of this made Crocs feel fun and joyful during a deeply depressing time. Healthcare workers, who suddenly became visible heroes during the pandemic, were prominently wearing Crocs. Crocs donated hundreds of thousands of pairs to medical workers, generating enormous positive press and goodwill. This reminded everyone that Crocs weren't just fashion items. They were functional footwear that people doing important, difficult work relied on daily. The combination of comfort during lockdowns, positive associations with healthcare heroes, and ongoing celebrity collaborations created perfect conditions for explosive growth. By 2021, Crocs' revenue hit over $2.3 billion. That's more than double what they were making at their previous peak before the 2008 crash. But more impressively, this growth was sustainable. This wasn't a fad bubble. This was genuine, broad-based demand from multiple customer segments. The people buying Crocs in 2021 were completely different from the people buying them in 2007. Sure, nurses and restaurant workers were still buying them for practical reasons. But now they were joined by teenagers buying limited edition collaborations, adults buying them as fashion statements, parents buying matching pairs for their whole family, collectors buying rare versions as investments. Crocs had successfully transformed from a functional product to a fashion product to a cultural phenomenon, all without fundamentally changing the actual product. The classic clog was basically the same weird foam shoe with holes that it had always been. What changed was the cultural meaning attached to those shoes. In 2022, Crocs generated over $3.5 billion in revenue, with a profit margin over 20%. Their profit margins were incredible because the shoes themselves are cheap to manufacture, but can now sell for premium prices, especially limited editions and collaborations. The company's market value went from less than $1 billion during the crisis to over $8 billion. That's not just recovery, that's transformation. But the financial numbers, as impressive as they are, don't tell the complete story of what happened. The real transformation is in cultural perception and brand meaning. Crocs went from being a punchline to being a cultural icon. From something you'd hide in your closet to something you'd proudly post on Instagram. From embarrassing to exclusive. From ugly to desirable. Fashion magazines that once mocked them now feature them prominently. Celebrities wear them as red carpet statements. Gen Z, the youngest generation of consumers, considers them essential wardrobe items. High fashion designers collaborate with them regularly. The same shoes that millennials remember being teased about in middle school are now items that their younger siblings stand in line for hours to buy and brag about owning. This complete cultural transformation didn't happen by accident or luck. It happened because of specific, intentional strategic decisions that Crocs made over more than a decade. And understanding these decisions provides lessons that apply to any brand trying to overcome negative perceptions. First lesson: Crocs never pretended to be something they weren't. They didn't try to redesign the shoes to make them look more elegant or traditional. They didn't apologize for being weird. They embraced being different and unusual. When everyone said Crocs were ugly, Crocs essentially said, yeah, they are. So what? This confidence and authenticity was ultimately appealing, especially to younger consumers who value realness over polish. Second lesson: they understood that fashion moves in cycles and cultural contexts change. What's uncool eventually becomes cool again if you wait long enough and conditions shift. The broader move toward comfort-focused fashion and ugly chic trends created an environment where Crocs could be reevaluated. Third lesson, they mastered artificial scarcity and limited editions. By creating collaborations that were genuinely hard to get, they made Crocs feel exclusive and desirable. This is the exact same strategy that Supreme, Off-White, and other hype streetwear brands use: create desire through scarcity. Fourth lesson, they leveraged influencer culture and authentic partnerships perfectly. By working with celebrities who genuinely liked and wore Crocs, not just people doing paid endorsements, they maintain authenticity. Post Malone and Justin Bieber actually wore Crocs in their real lives. This matters enormously to young consumers who can instantly detect fake endorsements. Fifth lesson, they embrace customization and self-expression. In an era where people want to show their individuality on social media, Crocs with gibbets became a way to express personality. Your Crocs could be completely unique to you, a reflection of your interests and identity. Sixth lesson, they rode the wave of nostalgia. Millennials who wore Crocs as kids had positive nostalgic associations. Once they got past their insecure teenage years, the shoes reminded them of simpler, happier times. Seventh lesson, they understood and embraced meme culture. Crocs became a meme. Being so ugly they're cool is inherently meme-worthy, and memes spread virally, especially on TikTok where Gen Z lives online. Eighth lesson, they never abandoned their core customers. While pursuing fashion-conscious young consumers, they continued serving healthcare workers, service industry workers, and other people who wore Crocs for practical reasons. This kept the brand authentic and grounded. The story of Crocs is really a story about brand resilience and understanding cultural moments. They can have given up during the dark days of 2008 and 2009. They could have tried to make completely different shoes. They could have rebranded entirely and walked away from the Crocs name. Instead, they stuck with who they were, waited for culture to shift, and seized opportunities when they appeared. They turned their biggest weakness, being ugly, into their biggest strength, being boldly different. Today, Crocs are worn by absolutely everyone. From toddlers taking their first steps to elderly people who need comfortable shoes for walking. From minimum wage service workers to millionaire celebrities. From suburban parents to urban fashion influencers. From people buying them purely for comfort to people buying them as fashion statements. To people buying them as collectible investments. They have completely transcended demographics, age groups, income levels, and fashion tribes. They're not for one type of person. They're for anyone who wants what Crocs offers. Whether that's comfort, style, self-expression, cultural participation, or all of the above. The collaborations continue nonstop. In 2023 alone, they worked with dozens of partners creating new limited editions monthly. They partnered with NSCHF, an experimental art collective, to create bizarre versions like platform boots that look like cartoon characters. They worked with McDonald's creating Crocs with burger and fries gibbets. They collaborated with Barbie for the massively successful movie release, creating pink Crocs that sold out in minutes. Each collaboration generates millions in sales and billions in media impressions. Each keeps Crocs in the cultural conversation and reinforces that they're relevant and desirable. The company has also smartly expanded beyond the classic clog while keeping it as their core product. They make sandals that use the same comfortable foam material. They make slides for people who want something even more casual. They make platform versions for people who want more height. They even make lined versions for cold weather. But the classic clog remains their biggest seller and most iconic product, because ultimately, that weird foam shoe with holes is what Crocs is. It's distinctive and instantly recognizable. You can spot Crocs from across a crowded room. That brand recognition is invaluable and impossible to fake. From near bankruptcy to multi-billion-dollar cultural phenomenon. From being mocked to being celebrated. From practical work shoe to high fashion statement. From having zero cultural cachet to being one of the most talked about brands in fashion and streetwear. This transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because Crocs understood culture, embraced their unique identity, partnered strategically, created artificial scarcity, leveraged social media, and never apologized for being exactly what they were. The lesson isn't just for shoe companies or fashion brands. It's for any business that's considered uncool, ugly, outdated, or undesirable. You don't necessarily have to change what you are. Sometimes you just need to change how people think about what you are. Crocs didn't make prettier shoes. They didn't make more traditional shoes. They made being ugly and weird into something desirable and cool. They turned their biggest weakness into their greatest strength and biggest differentiator. In doing so, they prove something profound about branding and consumer psychology. There's no such thing as a permanently damaged brand. With the right strategy, the right timing, the right cultural understanding, and the courage to be yourself, even the most hated product in the world can become beloved. Today, when someone wears Crocs, they're not making a mistake or settling for less. They're making an active choice that says something about who they are. A choice that says they value comfort over conformity, that they're confident enough to wear what they want, regardless of traditional fashion rules, that they appreciate brands with personality and history, that they understand being different isn't a weakness, it's a strength. That's incredibly powerful brand positioning. That's an emotional connection that goes far deeper than just buying shoes. That's the kind of brand loyalty that survives recessions, trend changes, and competitive pressure, from failure to fashion icon, from bankruptcy to billions, from universal hatred to universal popularity, all because they had the courage to be ugly in a world obsessed with beauty, all because they understood that being different could become being special, all because they never stopped believing in those weird foam clogs with holes. Here's everything that matters. Crocs started as practical boat shoes sold at a Florida boat show, exploded as a fad reaching 850 million in sales by 2007, crashed spectacularly during the financial crisis when everyone decided they were ugly and tasteless, nearly went bankrupt while being universally mocked as the worst shoes ever made, survived by focusing on core customers like nurses who valued comfort over fashion, got an unexpected boost when high fashion embraced ugly chic trends and Christopher Kane put them on runways, then partnered with celebrities like Post Malone, Justin Bieber, and Bad Bunny who made them cool again through authentic endorsements. Master limited edition drops creating artificial scarcity, and Desire rode the pandemic comfort trend perfectly. Embraced social media and meme culture on TikTok and Instagram. Never apologized for being weird and ugly, but instead turned it into their greatest strength, and transformed from the most hated shoes in the world into a cultural phenomenon, worth over $8 billion, selling a pair every 2 seconds, all by understanding that being different isn't a problem, it's an opportunity, and that cultural perceptions can completely reverse if you're patient and strategic. The story of how Supreme went from a tiny Newark skate shop to a billion-dollar empire by intentionally making people wait in line for hours involves even more brilliant psychological manipulation than you'd imagine.